Hello, welcome to the Curator Podcast. This is episode 29. Hi, hello, welcome once again, dear listener, to the Curator Podcast. I am your host, Mark Fraser, and this is episode number 29. I want to keep the preamble short on this episode because this episode is a milestone episode, I guess you could say. On this episode, I have a legendary punk rock wise man, I guess. A man who needs very little introduction. His name is Ian Mackaye, and he is the guest on this episode. There's not really a lot to say about Ian Mackaye. If you listen to this podcast regularly and you like a lot of the artists on it, then the chances are that you know who Ian Mackaye is, and in that sense he doesn't need any introduction to you. If you don't, however, then one, that's quite silly, and two, he's responsible for Discord Records, and with Minor Threat, Fugazi, responsible for a lot of, well, pretty much all hardcore music, I guess you could say. He's a inspiring figure. He's an awesome figure. I don't mean awesome in, you know, the parochial sense of, oh, that's cool. I mean awesome as in his intellect, his talent, and what he's achieved inspires awe. And it's inspired awe in me and multiple other people. Pretty much everyone I've spoken to on this podcast is influenced by him, including myself. And to talk to him was an extreme honour and an extreme privilege. I make no bones about this fact. He didn't have to speak to me, but he did, and he was very kind, very gracious, and just a staggeringly intelligent man. I conducted this interview over Skype, so towards the end the quality kind of cuts out a little bit because my mic kind of messed up, so it kind of switches over to his mic. So towards the end you'll notice a little bit of a quality drop on my voice, but it's fine. You can still hear me, and that's the main thing. Also want to thank my friend Todd Jordan for producing this interview for me. His podcast is called The Bitter End, and it's just a new podcast, but it's really good. You should check it out. But yeah, all thanks to him for editing and producing the interview. I really appreciate his help, and him taking the time to do that for me. It means a lot. So yeah, I'm going to open up now with In My Eyes by Minor Threat, and I hope you enjoy this interview.
Okay, so Ian Mackaye, you are Ian Mackaye, which
that's correct. Scottish.
In my head, that's a huge fucking thing. How are you doing?
I'm good. Do you know that the first time Fugazi came to Scotland, which is the first time I ever went to Scotland, we were on stage, and I said to the crowd, "How do you pronounce my name?" And they said, "Ian Mackaye." And I was so happy because I grew up being called Mackaye. That's, most people here say Mackaye in America, but it was always Mackaye. So I felt like I'm fucking home. My family came from the Mackaye clan from way up north, up near Stranraer, up that way. And there's a little town called Betty Hill, on the north coast. And my father and I went up there, and it was incredible to see entire cemeteries filled with Mackayes. Very interesting. One thing is my grandfather actually added the E to the end of the name. Part of that had to do with trying to get people to say Mackaye and get away from the Irish Mackaye. But also, he was a newspaper writer, and he just thought his byline looked better, looked more balanced with the E on the end of it.
It's interesting that you mentioned the newspaper thing, because I was doing some research on you, because I do research on all my guests, and you were talking about, I seen you talking about, I think it was at the Library of Congress, you were talking about how your mother used to collect letters and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, my mother was a true journalist, in the sense that she actually kept journals from age 6 until she died in 2004. I mean, some years, she had 5 kids, so there were some years that she wasn't writing as much as others, but she kept documentation for the entire time. So if it wasn't her own actual journal writing, she would keep copies of letters she wrote to people, or maybe just clippings or things, or just jot down little notes, even her calendars and stuff. So when she died, she left us 4 organized filing cabinets filled with papers. And tens of thousands of pages of journal entries. Fascinating, really interesting. She's a brilliant writer. She was great. And so she really was the one that impressed upon me, I think, the idea that if you write it down, you don't have to remember it, which I thought was a nice thing to think about. And I kept journals pretty steadily for about maybe 10 or 12 years. And then I lost the plot on it. Every once in a while I'll write a little, but I don't keep regular journals anymore.
So you don't write so much these days then? You're kind of more focused on the music, I guess. Well, I suppose lyric writing as writing itself, I do that as well. So I guess what I wanted to ask really was, as writing, I guess writing's kind of part of your family then? It's always been around?
Yeah. I mean, I would say that, it's funny you should say I write a lot of lyrics. I'm painfully slow with my lyrics these days, but there's no question that I come from a family of writers. My mother's father was a sports writer for a newspaper, and her mother was an English teacher. My mother wrote for magazines, and she, as I said, kept journals and was an incredible correspondent with hundreds of people. She also, she and my father wrote a book about the school they went to, where they met. They met at a school called Sidwell Friends, which actually now is where the Obama children go to school. That's here in Washington. My father's father was also, he was a magazine writer and a true crime writer in the 1920s. He was part of the propaganda machine during the war. He was in London working for the OSS. And my grandmother on my father's side was a fairly successful mystery writer, sort of along the Agatha Christie vein in the 1920s and 1930s. And then she went on to write for a magazine for many years. And my father was a newspaper man. He worked, and he was a writer. So my family, everyone has been, like, my oldest sister is a poet, and my next oldest sister is a linguist, and words have been really serious for us. So I don't know if it's so much writing, but it's about words. And I think we do put in our family, a lot of emphasis into words and the order in which you arrange them. And in terms of writing, in some ways, I suspect that my ability to write has actually been somewhat hampered almost by the fact that my parents were such prolific and excellent writers, because I used to, just feel like a little inferior, frankly. When you read something to your dad and he's like, it's good, he might say, that's an idea that's been thought of before, but that's good. And you're like, oh God, you kind of want to have something a little more, you want someone like a real cheerleader. And I suspect that one of the reasons that I got into music was really because it was a discipline that was outside of my family. Like nobody in my family were musicians. There's nobody. My mom could read. She could read sheet music and play the piano, but she couldn't write, and she didn't. That wasn't. And she wasn't really a musician. And my dad also was not. My dad, sings in his church, but he's not. He understands like how to sing. He can read music, but he actually can't even really hit the notes. He just he has a like an intellectual relationship with music, whereas I'm like, for me, music was very much it just came to me or super naturally. It just became something that was so obvious and undeniable for me, and in a way, I feel like it was a discipline that was outside of the purview of my parents. I could engage with expression and words without having to sort of fall under their understanding of how it works. So it was, I think, very much anyway, yes. The answer to your question is yes.
Well, it's interesting. Well, obviously music is the reason how what has brought me to talk to you. And one of the things that this podcast deals with is creativity and passion. And you obviously have both, which is great. But some of the things you were saying there, like, it's interesting because obviously punk in itself it still is about rebellion, and from a very early age you realise that without even realising that, if that makes sense. Like, it was about getting away from the, like you say, the purview of your parents.
Well, I grew up at a time here in the States, and I think it was somewhat international, where social convention, there was a revolution, really, a cultural revolution going on in the 60s. So as a young child, growing up in Washington, D.C., I was surrounded by, tumult. There was obviously the civil rights movement was, in full, there's a lot of action in that world. There was, the sexual liberation, and there was women's rights, and of course the anti-war movement, which was, so central at that time. Every day you heard about Vietnam, or you heard about the people protesting against it. And because I was involved, my parents were involved with a very radical left church, an Episcopalian church that was really involved with protest and sort of countercultural life. I was exposed to that very early on, and I really, what I think I came away from, and through that experience was really, don't trust the government and question authority. That just seemed so obvious to me. Going into the 70s, when things sort of, the Vietnam War came to an end, and the United States went into a kind of a strange mindset, like a very strange mood. I couldn't see the rebellion. I couldn't figure out where the counterculture was, because the only evidence of it that I could find, at least when I was in high school, junior high and high school, really were just people that were, basically just self-destructing, either using, just drinking or using drugs, which never made sense to me, because I felt like, if you are actually challenging the status quo, you're kind of doing them a favor by neutralizing yourself, by just taking yourself out of the game. It never made sense to me for people to just, abuse substances as a form of rebellion. To me, it seems like actually the opposite of rebellion. And I was very confused about it as a young teenager, like where was the rebellion? Where was this underground? And it wasn't really until I really engaged with punk and studied, I'd argued about it and kind of knew about it and had a derisive opinion of it. But then at some point I actually listened to music and started to get this idea, or I started to realize that there was this incredible like sort of ocean of music and thinking that was unaware of. It'd be as if you were, if you were, walking around in a shopping mall trying to find, something somewhere to swim, and then you find an entrance to a cave, and you find this incredible underground lake, perfect, like, a perfect spring. That's what punk was like for me. And then when I finally saw a band, the first band I saw was the Cramps, and that was in February of '79, and that was really that was it. Like, I knew that's what I was going to be doing, and it was really profound for me. It's interesting to me. I don't think of. I understand that punk. People often think of punk as, the idea of it always being rebellious, but I feel like really what punk for me is free. Is just, it's like the area of like. It's like free thinking, like, like it's like a free space. And I think that free spaces, just by their nature, are rebellious because they break out from the status quo, or from the sort of the arrangement that we've allowed, like, our grids to be developed in. Like, we enter, in society that's things are very structured. So anytime I guess, when you choose to wear a different color, for instance, then you're really breaking with the masses. And so that, to me, but that's also that's just freedom of thought. And I feel like that's really what I think of punk as a free space. And in some ways, of course, to be free is rebellious in a society. But I think that sometimes the word, when you say rebellious, people think that just means to be sort of to agitate, or to be nihilistic, or to be self-destructive, or to be whatever it is. But I think that rebellious is a word that is a little more nuanced than most people realize.
I totally agree with that. Now, from my experience of growing up and listening to punk rock music, is that it's always kind of, for me, it's always kind of straddled that free nature with just outward displays of like violence, and I've never really felt comfortable with that. I guess as someone who's a pacifist, I never really felt as though that I could identify with that aspect of it. But on the other hand, I find the music itself can often sound quite violent, which I'm quite attracted to, in a sense. So it's like a weird juxtaposition almost of liking the release, but not the physical manifestation of it in anything other than the music or what you see on stage. If that makes sense,
Yeah, it makes sense. Sure. I mean, I think that it's a point of entry. I think that, like, I actually think punk rock is just a link in a very long chain. So I think that punk is folk, is jazz, is hip hop, is rock, is blues. I think all these things in their original manifestation were all had their own sense of release. And also I think the birth of all these things was attended by a lot of by violence too, because it was something that really, I think, people were threatened by. I mean, I also identify as a pacifist, but I have to say that I did a lot of fighting, and which was, it's a paradox, but it was a reality for me. And I remember actually, in the very early on, like, just, initially feeling, very maligned by sort of people on the streets, or people, and like other high school kids who would, there's other, like, these other high schools that would, they'd chase you down the street, or they jump you because you look weird, or whatever, And then you had this weird situation where the media had been so derisive about punk, so that all of their sort of depictions of punk always involved super violent, nihilistic, sadomasochist kind of people, saying that's what punk was, and which of course was offensive to those of us who weren't those things, and it was problematic because it gave society thought, oh, well, that's what these people are, and we hate them for that. But an even maybe more serious problem was that people who were actually sort of nihilistic and violent, and sadomasochistic, whatever, thought, oh, I must be a punk. And they started coming to shows. So what was initially sort of a circling of the wagons to sort of defend ourselves against external forces, suddenly I think that the violence moved into the shows where people who were coming to the shows were actually behaving in a way that was unacceptable. So it's sort of society thinks that we were all punching the crap out of each other at gigs because that's the way the media has just depicted it. But then what happens is people who have seen it and think, oh, that's what I want to do, they come to gigs and start punching everybody. So then we all of a sudden we found ourselves like the fighting kind of moved indoors. And at some point it just became, I realized like, this is insane. Like this is I had, in my mind, I had this philosophy of bruising the ego and not the body, which I think is ultimately a conceit. I really trusted myself to not send people to hospital, but I also was not scared of people and wouldn't back down. Or if I knew that I was, I knew how to run too, but but at some point, even if I could have lived by that philosophy, and I don't think it necessarily was, I don't think it was sustainable. It didn't. That was just me, and other people and friends of mine certainly were not following that philosophy. They were doing damage, and it became clear that violence begets violence. And I thought, I'm going to step out. And it was 1984. I thought, I'm done. I'm not going to fight anymore. And I did. I just was so clear because I realized like I'm a pacifist. And what am I doing? But the point being is that it was the birth of something new. And, with birth comes friction. And that's just part of something new. So your relationship with it, like maybe your point of entry is a little bit different. And the violence, I think a lot of the violence that people think about in punk rock now is sort of almost ritualized sort of behavior, because I don't really think there's not really an enemy at this point, even if there was one when I was, early on. But the music itself, there is a release. It is aggressive, and there is a, the idea I think is to feel free to express things passionately and serious.
One of the things I was wondering, because the whole threat of violence was always there, was that something that you often thought about before or even during like minor threat shows, that were you always kind of just waiting for it to kick off? Like sometimes.
Minor Threat was interesting because it was Minor Threat. Like there was one tour where I think every night there was always a fight, and quite often people would attack me on stage. I remember this. We did a show in Dallas, Texas, and this guy jumped on stage and ripped my shirt off. And this would be the third time on that tour already where someone had jumped on stage and ripped my shirt off. And I was so furious about it. And I chased a guy into the crowd, and I grabbed him and I ripped his shirt off. And then I dropped down on my knees and tried to tear his pants in half if I could, and at that very moment, the police they came running into the venue. It was like a hall, like a Knights of Columbus hall or something. And I remember the police came running in, and then they walk in. There's like a guy, two shirtless guys, and one guy's like trying to rip the pants off the other guy. And they're like, what is going on? But yeah, that was just, but I had to say that tour, there was, people, at that time, people were kind of gunning for me. I think there was a lot of the reputation of the band had sort of preceded us, and people were very confused. They thought that we were like advocates of a straight edge movement, which we were not, but they, in their mind, thought we were. So there was people there who wanted to fight me because they thought I was trying to be a fascist fundamentalist or something. So there was definitely a lot of fighting. Really the much more troubling violence was during Fugazi, because when Fugazi started playing, it was an era where the shows were much larger, and there was a much more established, there was these skinhead gangs, especially, all around the States. You just ran into there are different gangs in different areas. And, our shows were cheap. They were low ticket prices, the famously $5 shows. And one part about, that one aspect of having a low ticket price is that anybody can come in. And, if you have a high ticket price, people who are not really into the music aren't going to bother. So the skinhead kids I don't think they gave a damn about Fugazi. what they gave a damn about was that they had an audience and they had a target. Like, so there was it was a mass gathering and they could put on a display, and their display was usually just beating the shit out of people. So there were definitely times where, like, we did a show in Orlando. No, where was it? Oh, this I'm thinking of a show. That's a different one. But this is a show in Denver, Colorado, and during the opening band, there was these skinhead guys there, and they were just beating the crap out of people, and the show had to be stopped, and the skinhead guys were like smashing the windows out of the building, and then finally, like, we were getting ready to go on, and I really had to think about, right, like, how are we going to do this? Like, I'm generally the person who speaks, mostly to the crowd, so how are we, what am I going to say? Like, how do we? It was a little bit, it's unnerving sometimes to go on a stage knowing that people are going to get it. People very well may get injured. And it wasn't only skinhead violence. Sometimes it's just overcrowding, or sometimes it's just like, this unbelievable amount of stage diving. Most injuries that came, like serious injuries that occurred at Fugazi shows, were suffered by people not who jumped off a stage, but people who got jumped on by somebody jumping off a stage. And those are, very serious neck injuries. I don't know the actual figures, but I think probably a half a dozen people may have lost the ability to walk because they came to see us play. That's a terrible feeling, it's a terrible feeling. Yeah. So there were definitely times where, like, I don't have stage fright. I never have stage fright, but I've definitely had moments before we go on a stage where I think, all right, like, this is a potentially very dangerous situation, and how are we going to do this? How are we going to navigate it?
That seems to me like the whole overcrowding thing. The punk bands that I like now, like, that would never really happen to them because people don't really identify with it as much as they used to. But one thing I was kind of wondering is, just to go back a little bit, when you're talking about when you first seen the Cramps, do you still get that feeling when you listen to punk music now? Is that still something that you get?
Of course. My musical tastes have always been wide ranging. So, for instance, last night I looked at a guitar player named Roy Buchanan playing "Hey Joe" at the Austin City Limits as a video. He did this in the 70s, and it is a staggering performance. But this morning, I listened to Eddie Current's Suppression Ring from Australia, which is one of my favorite bands, and I listened to like a Miles Davis, sort of later, like late 60s, early 70s, sort of his acid funk jazz era. And then a band called Spirit Caravan, it's like a stoner doom band. And music always, like, the kind of music I listen to almost always inspires me and sets me off. And I tell people that the genre that I'm addicted to is music made by people who don't have a choice in the matter. And I don't know if, I believe that when these bands I listen to that I really like, I think this person just has a direct line. Like, they have to make this music, and they're hardwired for it. I'm sure there's in some cases that's me more than them. It's me thinking that more than they are. But honestly, most of them I feel like I'm kind of on. Like someone like a Vic Chestnut, or a Nina Simone, Jimi Hendrix, the Bad Brains. These are bands like they almost like, these people that they have to do what they do. They have to do what they do, and that's what I'm interested in. I'm not really interested in like music as performance in a way, like as a costume. Like I don't really respond to people who are shapeshifters. I mean, I don't think they're wrong. I don't respond to it. So I'm not like people who kind of jump genres or kind of chase, like kind of figure out what people would like, or I don't know, if they just sort of kind of dilly around in different forms because they can. That's less interesting to me. What I'm interested in is people who just have to play, and the music they play quite often is not at first really understandable. but with a little investment, becomes crystal clear.
I think that's totally true. Obviously, all humans seek connection, and I think when you become attuned to a specific kind of music from a young age, then you start to see that connection or feel that connection in a way that perhaps more mainstream or popular music or artists that are like shapeshifters, they just don't really have that same quality. Which is not to say they make bad music, but I think you're totally right. Like there's something there which you can sense almost, and almost like a ethereal kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I'm careful to not say that other stuff is not valid or not legitimate. I'm merely saying that for me, that's what I'm interested in. That's what I'm looking for. If I would listen to Fela Kuti or James Brown or the Beatles for that matter, I mean, something is going on there. Like those people are making music that is just brilliant. It's unbelievable that they could. I mean, we're essentially talking about wires strung on pieces of wood. We're talking about plastics, skin stretched out on other pieces of wood, and through these strange assortment of objects, people are able to combine like these sounds, can manipulate them and combine them in a way that transports us. That's pretty miraculous.
You spent a long time documenting that throughout the whole of Discord. You've been obviously documenting music, which gives you that feeling in your gut, that connection to somebody else's human experience, which we can never experience objectively. I was just kind of wondering then, like over the years, do you think that the music that you've loved and that you continue to love, is that like maybe? I always see it. The longer I've been doing this podcast for, I've always kind of seen it as a reflection of an obsession with just something like music or art in general, I guess. And yeah, the question really was, would you say you're obsessed with music, or are you obsessed with art which is kind of different or makes you feel something?
I guess obsessed is not the word. I think of it, maybe it's just a semantic thing, but obsessed to me, obsessed suggests it's out of balance. Like when someone's obsessed with something, they're not, like they're putting so much energy into that one thing that other aspects of their lives are not being attended to. So it's not a word I would probably use, but I would say that I breathe it. It's definitely part of I don't think a day goes by where I don't think about music on some level. I know that. There's no question about that. And it's a currency that I think of music as a currency in a way that we trade. And it connects us. I don't know. It's interesting. I don't know. It just became, I didn't go to college because I just knew what I was going to do. I was going to be in a punk band.
Yeah.
And I've never looked back. I always just think I just wake up every day with something to do that I want to do.
Do you ever reflect on how important the legacy you've created has been to people all over the world?
No, I don't reflect upon it. I'm aware of the fact that that we've been working for a long time, and the label will be 35 years old in December. I'm aware of the fact that I'm sitting here at Discord House right now. This is, I think, perhaps is the only still existing punk house, actually from the original house. This is, I moved to this house on October 1st, 1981. I don't live here now, but I own it and I still work out here. I understand, I'm aware of the fact that I have, I've kept all sorts of stuff. I have, 35 years of correspondence and thousands of flyers and thousands of recordings and photos. So I have this sort of this archive it was just naturally occurring. Like I wasn't trying to snap everything up. I just did the work and didn't throw it away. So while I can't say I reflect upon the importance of anything, I am aware of the fact that I have this evidence of I think, a very significant cultural moment in the United States and England, other countries. And I do have a sense of responsibility, a custodial responsibility, not only to the archives, since they exist. I think that would be useful for other people, but also I have a custodial responsibility for the label, because I lived an unusual life, and part of the reason I've been able to do that is because hundreds of people have entrusted this label with their music. We never used a single contract with any of these bands, and yet we've been steadily pressing and selling these records and paying royalties, for 3 decades now, over 3 decades. So that's an unusual relationship. And I think when things were there was a period of time in the 90s where we were selling so many records, it was pretty amazing. And there was a lot of money. It was it was easy to keep going. Things are certainly quieter now. We sell far fewer records. And I guess this is where the custodial responsibility really kicks in. Now, I feel like I really owe it to these people that as long as there are people, if there's an interest in hearing this music, and specifically in owning vinyl or a CD or whatever of this music, then I feel like I have a responsibility to make it available, because they've trusted me to look after it. So yeah, I do have that sense of responsibility, but in terms of reflecting on the importance of the work, I just don't really, it's just not my way. I just don't think about stuff like that. I don't celebrate anniversaries, and I don't really, it just doesn't matter. I just do the work that's in front of me.
When I was doing some research on you, is a lot of people who've interviewed you always talk about like the punk and hardcore scene, the stuff that Discord do in the past tense. To me, it's not past tense, because I'm part of it and the city I live in. Does that ever get on your nerves that people talk about it as if it's past when it's clearly still ongoing? Obviously, you just said you're still an active member of making sure that it exists where you are. Do you know what I mean?
I don't really care what people say, so I don't worry about that. I think that it seems to me very clear that the label is, really becoming more of a historical label. I mean, we're not still putting out, tons of records. We put out a few things and occasionally a new thing, but it's not. I think the label really was started to document a scene, something that was happening. Most record labels, I think they lead with the idea that they're a record label, so then they put out a record for a band as a way to sort of generate interest in the band. I think our approach is really that we're aware of a band that is generating a lot of excitement, and there's like something happening, like there's a scene around that band, and then we want to document it. So it's a bit of a different approach. Like, we're not trying to generate excitement. We're trying to document it. And I mean, obviously, once you document the excitement, then it tends to add to the mix. But mostly, we're not trying to promote things as much as we're trying to document them. And in Washington, in the last few years, things were really quiet. There's some good bands, but there's not. I can't say the bands are. There aren't bands that are really generating a tremendous amount of excitement. So, and I think they can be. Because I said they're good bands, but for whatever reason, it's just things are not coalescing in a way that you have that sort of sense that things are like growing. They just sort of like they already seem very static. And so we don't put out a lot of records at the moment, new records. But, as I said, it's a custodial responsibility. So the label is definitely active, but mostly what we're active with is taking care of the catalog. And that's, I think that's completely legitimate. And I'm sure there's some people who, I mean, let's put it this way. When I was in, Minor Threat, people sort of rued the fact that they preferred the Teen Idols, the band I was in before that, like that era. And then when I was in Embrace, people and Fugazi, people really wished I was still in Minor Threat, and they talked about Minor Threat. And then when I was, when Amy and I were playing in the Evens, people wish I was talk about Fugazi. Who cares? I just, I appreciate that people are interested in the label. There's some, I think people, it's their point of entry, where they come in and how they perceive things. I remember on the last time we were in England, Fugazi, that is, this guy came to a show, and he came to me afterwards and he said, I was really kind of struck by how many songs you guys sing on. And I said, I don't understand. He said, well, I thought you were more of an instrumental band. And I thought, I was like, well, how can that? I was trying to figure out what he was talking about, and it finally became clear that his only relationship with Fugazi was the soundtrack record to the Instrument movie. He had never heard any of the other stuff. He just picked up the record randomly and enjoyed it, and then decided he would just come see the band. He had no idea about that. This is 2000 I guess 2002 or somewhere around there. Or maybe it was 99, because right when the Instrument soundtrack came out, maybe. But in any event, it was very interesting for me to think about this idea that it was like a proof that people's relationship with the band or the label is so tied to what their point of entry is, where they are with it. And so people can think what they want. I actually don't ever hear people talk about Discord in the past tense. And they did, I wouldn't care, because I'm not doing it for them or their estimation. Like, I'm doing it because it's the work that has to get done.
I think that's the only sensible way to look at it, because you could drive yourself mad. You can go crazy otherwise if you keep thinking about that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, one has to decide whether they are, like, if their shape is one that they decide, or if it's a shape that like the facets of the shape is just what other people's opinions are. Like who you are is based on other people or yourself, and you have to make that decision.
Do you often find that's one of the things I guess that's the main thing that's driven your life then? It's all about just being true to what I believe in and fuck everyone else, which is pure punk rock. I guess not to a detrimental sense. There's obviously people you care about and life that goes on that you want to be part of, but it's less about caring what people think of you and what you do.
I mean, not quite so harsh. I do, I think my general motto is that I care, but I don't give a fuck. So it's like, I do care. Like I love people. I think I'm a pretty friendly person, and I do care about people. But if somebody has a problem with me, I just don't give a fuck. I don't care. I can't. It's just bad. It's just bad. Like, what's the point of what's the point of putting bad energy into? You can't use like good energy to fix bad energy. If it's bad energy, just let it be. It'll sort itself out. I mean, I've been, over the years, have been subject to some fairly, ugly comments and behaviors, but I just think I'm not going to engage with them because I don't see the point. There's no point in it. I'd much rather spend my energy making something than trying to reconstruct something that people are trying to destroy. It just seems ridiculous.
I can speak for myself in saying that when I was setting up this interview and getting ready for it, like I'm pretty nervous.
People often tell me that they're nervous to speak with me, and I understand it. There's the power, the relation, like the power that you've sort of attributed to me, or the things that you attribute to me, really has more to do with your relationship with the music and your, like how, and people a lot of times when they meet me, it's an unusual situation because they have a very deep relationship with maybe my name or my image or my voice, but they've actually never met me. And when they meet me, they don't have anything to say to me because the dialogue is all inside of them.
Yeah.
And I'm very used to it, and I don't, and I also understand it. And people often will thank me for my music, and I was always uncomfortable accepting those thanks because it just seemed weird, to be thanked all the time for your music. But I realized that, what I was comfortable with was saying that on behalf of music, I could accept their thanks. But I do feel like, I've said this before that, music kicked my ass, and I only intended to return that favor. And that's, so I understand where they're coming from. I'm not particularly nervous about meeting people. I don't really think that's not part of who I am really. I just don't, but I certainly have been, like, I remember early on, like with, say for instance, like the Cramps, like, that first show I went to, I remember I went to the bathroom and I was taking a pee in a urinal, and I looked over and the drummer, Nick Knox, was in the next urinal next to me, taking a piss. And I knew who he was because I had seen maybe the first set, maybe they played 2 sets, but I knew who he was exactly. I knew precisely who he was. I knew how, it just didn't make any sense that he was in a bathroom, like with the same bathroom as me, certainly. I mean, only ever seen large bands in like arenas and stuff. And I realized how completely I was stunned, and terrified. I get it. I understand. That was just the power of that power of that moment was really profound for me, because it was sort of, on the one hand, I was faced with somebody who had like this immense impact on me, but in a way that left me speechless. I mean, first of all, you don't generally talk to strangers at urinals anyway.
Yeah.
But what about, and you might talk to a friend, but what about somebody who but you've never met? It's just an interesting setting. So I'm familiar with that kind of feeling. And I think a lot of times it's interesting because I've done so many interviews, and I don't think in my interviews I'm ever, like, it's not like I'm known for being mean in my interviews, or, I don't like belittle the interviewers. I know other people who are much more famous for taking out, going after the interviewers. someone like John Rotten or somebody who, he could on a bad, just depending on who you get, what day you interview him. But so it's funny because quite often people say, I was really nervous to speak with you, but I'm like, well, why? And I think that's because that's the power of music. That's why.
You reminded me of what my friend always says, and it's like, it doesn't matter who they are, everybody wipes their ass, and it's like, well, yeah, that's totally it. Like everybody's just a person, and they're no different from you, really.
I guess unless they can afford to have somebody else wipe it for them.
I'd like to. I don't know if I want to meet that person. I don't think I'd get on with that person particularly well.
I'm sure one exists.
That's a depressing thought, isn't it? Oh God.
I guess babies don't wipe their own asses. Babies and infirm people.
Well, yeah.
I think I found a flaw in your friend's concept.
No one's perfect, Dean.
Yeah.
I hate that stuff.
I was wanting to ask you. I've got a couple of questions that some of my friends have wanted me to ask you. So I guess I'll ask them if you're okay to do that.
Sure.
One thing I wanted to kind of I'll start with this one. I think one of my pals is a huge fan of both Minor Threat and Fugazi. Obviously, he was wondering about. He says punk. He thinks punk rock's always been like a youth-driven movement. And he wanted to know if you agreed with that idea, and if you think that punk was a valid subculture, if it has to be truly driven by a certain energy of youth.
I think that there's the young idea. I do think that the young idea is kind of part of punk. I think that the reason that youth excel at punk is because quite often their relationship with music or with society hasn't been beaten out of them by either formal structure or formal teaching or just people becoming kind of jaundiced in a way. What I love about punk stuff, especially like with young people, is that they're like coming to terms with their instruments, they've usually have not been usually not trained and just learning how to play themselves and teaching themselves how to play, and then in their mind having this sense like maybe they're listening to some kind of music or a particular band and they're trying to emulate that band. In their mind, they're playing just like this other band, but their relationship with their instrument is so different than the people who are in the aforementioned band. So what's coming out of them sounds really nothing like it, but a lot of times it's something totally unique. I mean, there's a band, for instance, there's a band on Discord called Void they're from the early 80s. And I think in their minds, they were just playing kind of hard rock, kind of metal kind of stuff. But they were such crazy players that the music they made was completely unique. And that I love. I love seeing people coming to their instruments or coming to learning, sort of learning on the job in a way. That I really like. Usually what happens after that is that people's relationship with their instruments or their bands or the business becomes sort of careerist. And that becomes much less interesting to me. So I think that your friend's theory is somewhat correct because I think kids aren't really thinking about careers. And I think the careers are what usually get in the way of the new idea. Because it's, I guess there's not really an audience for new ideas because they haven't been thought of yet.
Yeah.
So I'm interested I always like the new idea. But having said that, now I'm 53. I still will see musicians who are older than me that though they don't identify necessarily as punk, in my mind that it's the same. It's kind of the same thing. They're just like the point for them is not the career. It's the unattainable goal, like the thing that they're going after. And that's what's so engaging for me to see people reaching for something that's always just a little out of reach. They can't quite get there, but it's in the flailings that such amazing moments can occur.
One question somebody was wanting me to ask you, and you've mentioned music as a career, so I think it's a good way to sort of see into it. Is I think now with the advent of the internet and the way that music is being distributed and is out there just now, do you think there's actually more kids that are now thinking of it as a valid career to try and be a musician, when really there's so much, like, you need to do so much to even contemplate having a career in music? And I think a lot of people kind of go out and they seek that. They seek to be a musician or be a pop star as a career option. Do you think that's something that's, maybe the question is, I guess, do you think the internet has changed the way, or has destroyed, is the question? Do you think the internet has destroyed the music industry, and is that a problem?
You asked me three different questions there. So what is your first? The first question is, do I see kids today thinking of music as a valid career? Is that the first question?
Yeah.
It's funny you should say that. There was a period of time in the mid-90s where people would say to me, they started asking me for advice about how they could pay their rent when they go on tour. And I mean, my answer would be like, write a good song. I don't know. It's not like you don't just get it because you don't just get paid because you go on tour. You get paid because people want to see your band, and people want to see your band because you've done something that they're interested in. So there was this weird moment where I think early on punks never thought about like how they're going to make money. They just wanted to go play. And so everyone worked shitty jobs and saved and then went on tour. There was some point in time where people were like, well, I want to go on tour, but also I need to make money to do that. Right? Then go get a job. I don't know what to say. So there was that shift. Then around the turn of the century, there was this I just started to notice a proliferation of advertisements on television and magazines that featured sort of, I guess, what would be called indie rockers. Like car companies showing that you can get your guitar and your amp in the back of their car, or, a liquor ad where, people are just jamming in their basement or something. And I saw so interesting that they've kind of seized upon this sort of imagery as a way to sort of give some street credibility to their products. But I think that advertising informs people, and I think there was a point in time where people were like, oh yeah, that's like, I could be a lawyer, or I could be, a cop, or I could be a real estate agent, or I could be a musician. And I suppose that's true if you're prepared as a musician as a job, if you're prepared to play exactly what people want to hear. Because that's the only way I can think of. If it's a service industry, then that's true. That's the way you're approaching it. But that's not how I think about music. So I don't think I work. People say, well, that's easy for you to say because you live off your music, but I actually live off my fucking work. I work all the time. I'm not playing music right now. I'm talking to you.
Yeah.
And when I get done with this, I got more work to do all day. I have a record label. The times that we toured, I booked the bands. I manage a band. We do work. We do work so we can basically be free when we play. And so it's very difficult for me. I think that there's this sense that music like band, or like that's a career choice, but I guess so, but only if people like you. And I don't really, that's just not how I think about it. So I still don't, it took me a long time to say like, I'm a musician, because it's just not, it just seems so insane to say that, because it just seems, I don't even know what that means really. But the truth is, I guess I'm a musician. What was the second part of your question?
The second part was, it was kind of that. I think the whole attitude has kind of been born out of this whole internet culture which we live in, and obviously that's changed the music quite a lot. So that the other question was, has the internet destroyed the music industry, and if so, is that a problem?
Well, two thoughts. One is, I think the internet has created a situation. This is not actually limited to music. There is a kind of a, it seems to me there's a lot of what I would refer to as insertional economics going on, where people are trying to figure, they're seeing that money is going from one place to another, and they're trying to create jobs or kind of figure out ways to insert themselves between those 2 points. Hence, an enormous amount of consulting groups, and like people have jobs like, I'm consulting on how best to handle your social media, or just people. It's like all these weird jobs that people have. They're all based on the internet, or some computer thing, to some degree. And it's very interesting to me. And it seems like a house of cards ultimately, because people aren't doing anything. It's not lost on me, by the way, that when people spend all day and often all the night working on a computer, they might put in 8 to 10 hours of work, and then if they look up from the computer, nothing in the room is moved. And I think there has to be a mass psychological effect on as will result from this. If I was to give you a sponge and a bucket and told you to start working, and 8 hours later you looked up, you'd have a clean goddamn room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If I gave you a rake and put you in a yard, it'd be leaf free. But with a computer, you could sit all day with your brain completely hard at work, but nothing moves. And I'm not a Luddite, and I'm not saying it's bad. It's just something to think about. And I think that something like being in a band, that's kind of like people they come to yeah, I think I'll be in a band or whatever. But it's kind of like they don't really want to. They don't know what to do with themselves. People don't know what work they can do, and they think, well, maybe I'll web designer, or maybe I'll be a musician, or maybe I'll be both. I don't know. It's very strange. In terms of the internet destroying the music industry, yeah, it certainly has done some damage. I think that it's changed the way. It's actually less about the streaming and downloading. For me, that has been less of an impact than the. It's like it's scattered everybody's brains. So, people. I think now people can listen to, 1 million songs, and all at once. Basically, they can listen to. And they end up listening to 3 seconds of something, and that really has affected music in a way that. I think my experience with music was always that you get a record and you really spend time with it. And part of the reason was it was an economic thing. You spent whatever, it's $12 on a record. So you couldn't afford 2. So you bought 1, and you take it home, you listen to it for, a week straight. But now, since I can virtually listen to anything for free, I tend to not be able to focus on any one thing. It's a little bit like if I go to a hotel and they have cable television. I don't have cable television because I just don't want to get into all that fucking mess. But one of the things is, like, when I was a kid, there was 4 channels basically, or 5 channels on the television. And I watched a lot of television. Like and you always, because you just watch whatever was on. But when I go to hotels, there's 900 channels. And I can't watch anything. I get distracted. I always think there must be something else I could be watching. And I think that there's a parallel in terms of music that people, they're just not going to sit down with a record when they can listen to 50 different pieces of music. They always think there must be something else that I could be listening to. And I think that has had a real effect. Now, all of these things, that's just the landscape. And, there was a period of 100 years where the record industry really had a monopoly on the way people were engaging with recorded music. But prior to that, 100 years, prior to that century of monopolization on the record labels, there was thousands of years where people just had to make music and go out and play it, because that's what they did. There was no way to buy music or to hear it unless you were in the room with the people, or if you could read music and play it yourself. So since I know music was here before the music industry, and I know music was here before the internet, and since I believe music was a form of communication that predates language, I'm not worried about it. It's going to find its way. Music always wins.
Yeah, I wouldn't worry about it either. The only thing that I have noticed personally is as the landscape has changed, I do see the price of actually bringing bands to town has went up because less people are coming to shows, because less people are spending time doing what we love doing, and that's spending time with long periods of time with records that we love.
Yeah.
And that's the part that really depresses me about it.
That's a very good point. Another aspect of that, which is also, I think, a result of, I think you're right, that fewer people are going out to shows because they're on their computers. But another thing that's, I think, a result of the internet, which has been really problematic, I just talked to a couple of different bands, European bands that came to the States, and it's become like partially has to do with the fact of, the increased security surrounding, I guess, terrorist perception of, or perceived terrorist threats. But getting into this country has become extremely more difficult and much more expensive. To the tune where it might cost bands, £3,000, £4,000, £5,000 just for visas. So right there, it's going to eliminate. It's going to eliminate a certain level of band because they just can't afford to come over. And I think that's true in the other direction too. I think what's happened with, I think the reason the internet's played a role in that is that I think that the governments, like the immigration people, are all looking for ways. Everybody's looking for ways to make money, and the government's looking for ways to try to make more money. And the internet has allowed them to really kind of be able to monitor what's going on. So let's just say, for instance, like historically, like if bands would come into the States, we would tell them, don't come with a visa, just come with your guitars and tell them you're recording, and we'll get you a letter from a studio saying, yeah, these dates are on. And that would work fine. But now if people arrive, let's say I'm coming into a country, let's say you fly over to the States and you have a guitar, and the customs person says, or the immigration person says, what are you doing here? And you say like, oh, I'm recording at this studio. I have a session. And that's nice. And then he or she would type your name into a search engine, and it would produce the name of your band. And then he or she would type in the name of your band, and it would produce the dates of the tour. And this has really made it impossible for bands to get into the country. So the internet has done something that's really it's insidious in a way in terms of pricing, making things too expensive and too prohibitively stringent. I mean, punk can't play by the rules, and this is a real problem. I mean, England was the first, really. Coming into England from the continent was really problematic. I remember once coming in the 90s, and the people in the booth actually had copies of the music papers. They had like Enemy and Melody Maker, and they would just look in the back to see if you had any ads, like for your tour, which is a sort of very analog version of now, where they just type into a search engine and bang, they got you. So this had a really interesting, like how do you fly under the radar if the radar is vertical?
Yeah,
I don't know. I'm thinking about it.
I find that I've been playing in bands since I was 16, and I'm 30 this year, and I find it inconceivable that any band that I'm in will ever play in America, because the point of entry is just so obscene. It's obscenely high.
Exactly.
I can never imagine it happening.
And that, to me, that is a tragedy. But you know what? It's not over yet, so we'll see.
Wow. There's nothing else really to say. There's nothing that can follow that, really. I don't think. That was Ian Mackaye. I'm so grateful. I'm so thankful that he took the time to talk to me and helped me battle through some technical issues as well. So I hope you enjoyed that. It was a long interview, but worth every single goddamn minute. I think it was beautiful. He's just an amazing guy, and his intellect, his intelligence, his knowledge is just far beyond anything else I've ever experienced in punk rock, and it's amazing to speak to him. The guy's just a legend, a genius, if you will. Thank you very much for listening. I really appreciate you listening to this podcast. I've got some big news coming up soon, but if you could pop on over to iTunes and give me a rating and review, and if you want to talk to me, please just get me on Twitter or Facebook or send me an email. Even all these things are cool. I love talking to you. You're awesome. You listen, so you're obviously awesome. I think you're awesome. Even if you don't think you're awesome, I think you're awesome. So keep being awesome, I guess is what I'm saying. I'm going to play you out now with a song by Ian Mackaye's latest musical venture called The Evens, which is him and his wife. Now, in the middle of the interview, there is a Fugazi song. I was trying to cover, all the musical bases. There is a lot of musical bases, but the biggest musical bases in Ian Mackaye's life are kind of the most prevalent. And The Evens is his most recent thing, and they're really, really good. Have you ever heard them before? They're kind of lo-fi punk. They're kind of two-piece, take a lot of influences from other kinds of music other than punk, and as you can tell from the interview that you just listened to, Mackaye likes more than punk, so don't we all? We all do, don't we? Anyway, this song is from the first Evens album, and I really like this song. This is one of the first Evens songs I heard a few years ago, actually, and I think it's dead good. It's called Shelter 2, and I hope you enjoy it. I really enjoy it, and I hope you enjoyed my company, because I certainly enjoyed yours. Until next time, thank you for listening. Bye-bye.
To buy some electrical tape.